Hello there, everyone. Hope you're doing well this Tuesday. I am Elizabeth Corey, and I'm the founder of beatingtrauma.com. And today we're going to do a little bit of talking about shame. I know that doesn't sound like a great thing to talk about, but it is usually a pretty big part of our lives. And it is great for us to start to look at that and see how it is actually impacting us. Because I'll be honest, shame can be quite sneaky. We don't always know that it's there. We don't always know how it is messing with our lives. It's actually, to some degree, quite stealthy. So a lot of times we need to talk about it. We need to talk about shame. We also need to talk about the things we feel shame about. Because the more we bring shame into the light, so to speak, the less impact it's going to have in our lives. So I'm going to talk today both about what shame is, where it comes from, what's driving it, but also about how to spot it, so that we can release it, which is ultimately the goal that we're trying to meet here when it comes to shame. Excuse me, there really is no value in carrying this in our system. So that's what we're going to focus on today. I want to say hi to Jan. Glad you are here today. Thank you all for joining. And please, as usual, as I go through these things, please do add your perspectives around this topic as they come up and as you would like to. But this does seem to be coming up for a lot of people lately. I'm hearing from a lot of people that they're working with shame, they're noticing shame, things like that. So that's one of the reasons why I'm bringing it to the discussion table today, in particular. So I want to start off by just explaining that when the way that I see shame, which is that I see it as one of the 5 basic traumatic emotions. So I know that there are lots and lots of wheels out there that talk about feelings, and there's like hundreds of feelings on there. But I just find that all to be a little too confusing. I think it gives us too many options. It can make it, in my opinion, more difficult to narrow down what's going on from an emotional perspective. So I have narrowed it down to 5 traumatic emotions. And I consider these to be different from feelings. We can have lots and lots and lots of feelings. Emotions are highly unconscious to us until, of course, we start healing and doing our work to heal our trauma. Feelings can be a bit more conscious, and I usually see feelings as like results or manifestations of those highly unconscious emotions. So the 5 traumatic emotions, as I like to see it, is futility, which can also be called hopelessness, anger, grief, fear, and shame. So I work within that context, mostly those particular 5 emotions with my clients, because it's just simpler. And what I have found is that for the most part, the feelings that we're having can be tied back to one of those. And I will say that 2 really big feelings that come out of the emotion of shame are going to be guilt and embarrassment. In particular, those are 2 that I hear about a lot. Now, there are many, many others, but I'm just mentioning those 2 today in case those are things that you deal with in your own healing journey to some degree. Now, there is something that makes shame unique when it comes to these 5 traumatic emotions. Most of our traumatic emotions are maybe not true today, but they were at one time true. Okay? They are based on real, hard, evidential facts of things that have happened in our life. I love to talk about the idea that our parts are evidence-based. So our parts are the inner parts that hold these emotions. They're highly evidence-based. The emotions that they are sharing with us are based on actual experiences. Our anger, totally true. Again, based on the past, but totally true. Our futility, totally true based on the past, right? So all of these emotions have strong evidential experiences to back them up. The exception, I'm sorry about my throat. Apparently, I'm not supposed to be talking about shame today. But the difference here is actually that shame doesn't have actual experiences that it's based on from a standpoint of proving it to be true. Shame is a lie. Now, shame is based on experiences, but it's based on things we were told. Okay, again, coming back to this idea that shame is a lie, shame has likely been a lie within your particular family for a very, very long time. Okay, it's never true. It's not true. It's never been true. Okay, but it gets passed down from generation to generation to generation, right? So while our anger is true and real, and yes, we had bad things happen to us, and that's why we are angry, shame is a lie. So, and that means that a lot of times the feelings that come out of shame, like guilt, like embarrassment, are in fact based on a lie. And that's really something we want to start to get a sense of as we heal it. Now, there are problems here when it comes to shame, because shame can be incredibly difficult to spot. On a physical level, it can be really, really stealthy, kind of a little bit like futility. Interestingly enough, both futility and shame are held by the same part, who is often very stealthy. That's the karma kid part within us. So it's very, very difficult to spot it because that particular part of us is so stealthy. I will say that it can at times feel kind of like this creepy, crawly feeling in our bodies. Think of like restless leg syndrome, for example. That has a tendency to have that feeling to it, that creepy, crawly feeling. That is often a shame-based physical experience. It is often physically blocked, from our conscious awareness. And you might not be surprised if you've been following me for a while that one of the main physical blocks for shame is going to be the controller. So the controller is blocking the shame from kind of manifesting in the body, and especially from us noticing that it is manifesting in the body. There are exceptions, like I mentioned, restless leg syndrome is something that haunted me for years and years. It was horrible. I absolutely hated it. But I did not at the time, that even though I was physically experiencing it, I did not at the time understand that it was coming from shame, right? I understand that much more now. But now I don't have it anymore. So it's gone because I've processed a lot of the emotions that were driving it. The hardcore messages of shame. So when I say the hardcore messages of shame, for example, I'm talking about really intense self-loathing, like being really incredibly nasty to self. Those can be very hard for us to spot as well. So it's not just on a physical level, it's also very difficult for us to spot that intense self-loathing in our thoughts, like in the mind, because so much of those thoughts are really hidden in our unconscious and we are dissociating away from them. So they're not able to get into the conscious mind at the, sort of the full, what's the best word? The full intensity with which they are there. Generally, we're not going to see it. Again, this dissociating from it is also a controller tactic. The controller is really, 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 really trying to block shame, both physically and on a conscious thought basis as well. So we have to look oftentimes at less obvious signs that we have shame in our system. We have to kind of be a little bit of a detective in this way in order to really find the shame and connect with the shame. And one of the best ways I've found to do this is to actually figure out what different types of defenses to the shame we are actually exhibiting. When we start to do that, that starts to make things a little bit more clear to us as far as how the shame is kind of interacting in our lives. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the ways you might be blocking your shame, or you might have behaviors that show up that are actually meant to counter the shame. Most of these are going to be coming from the controller, but you might actually have a couple karma kid things showing up for you as well. So I'm going to talk about 5 different ways in which we might be acting out our defense against the shame, or our blocks or counters to the shame. Because if you see these and you start to work with these, it will help you then to get a little bit more connected to the shame itself. And I know you're thinking, why would I want to get connected to the shame itself, right? That sounds horrible. And the writing from the shame is truly horrible. It's not fun. I don't know if it's the least fun of any of the traumatic emotions, but it's pretty bad. The thing is, until we write from that shame, it sits in our system and it drives a lot of things in our lives. So as we write from the shame, that then allows us to release it. And it is in releasing it that life gets a lot easier. And we can get a lot more authentic and fight against ourselves a whole lot less. And that's ultimately a beautiful thing. But yes, it takes a lot of bravery and courage to write from the worst of our shame. But I highly recommend it so that you can release it. So I'm going to talk about these 5 things you can be on the lookout for in your own system that will help you to know that shame is present. Okay. The first one I'm going to talk about is perfectionism. Again, this is a controller behavior. It's a controller tactic in the system. So for everybody who struggles with perfectionism on some level, and this can also kind of manifest as like significant hypervigilance, for example, because you're constantly watching for every detail, right? Every detail, you want to sort it out. You want everything to be just perfect, just right. This perfectionism that the controller is usually behind, not usually, most of the time they are behind it. That perfectionism is going to be a response to shame, because to the controller, if they can figure out how to hide the shame by being as perfect as possible, okay, then that means that they win. I don't know what they win. Some kind of an award. They just are able to keep the shame from becoming like noticeable to others. And that's really the controller's goal. The controller doesn't have any idea that it may even be possible to release shame. That's not something that they would even really consider. The controller's goal is just to hide it. They want to hide the shame. And most of the things I'm going to talk about today are techniques for hiding the shame. Perfectionism is one of the most, I guess, obvious ways that we will hide shame. And so when you are around somebody who always gets everything perfect, or if you have a tendency towards always trying to get everything perfect yourself, it is a sign that they, or you don't feel that great about self, right? So this is something to watch for, something to look for, because perfectionism is a plague, and it really takes us away from being our most authentic selves. And it certainly takes the joy out of life. There's no doubt about that. I was this way for many, many, many years. So I get it. I'm very strong controller in my system. So that's the first thing, the first way that I want to talk about, that we will try to hide the shame. The next one is defensiveness. When somebody calls you out on something, right? Or somebody acts like, you've done something wrong, and they're trying to get you to acknowledge that you've, let's say, made a mistake, right? Defensiveness is the controller's attempt to protect the system, because when somebody is calling out a mistake that's been made, that will trigger the shame in that karma kid, and that can actually trigger a pretty intense self-loathing experience that could also include, for example, depression. And so the controller obviously wants to avoid that. They want to block that as best they can. So a lot of times when somebody is calling out a mistake we've made, the controller will jump in really, really quick and start making excuses, or start to deflect, or make it the other person's fault, or whatever it may be that they do. That defensiveness is meant to hide shame, and also to keep the karma kid from being triggered in general. Because the karma kid can do so they can kind of create a lot of problems in our lives when they become more active, and the controller knows this. So they know it is very important for them to kind of keep that karma kid in their little box, squelch them, suppress them, don't let them up. That's really important. That's one of the main goals of the controller. I mean, they want to do that with all parts, but I would say that a part that they feel most threatened by is probably that karma kid. So when somebody starts to say you've made a mistake, the controller jumps into action, sometimes so fast that we don't even know what just happened. I mean, it's just this boom, and they are there, right? They are active. They are shutting that other person down. They are making it their fault, right? This intense response is the controller's attempt to keep that karma kid, down, hidden, away, not sharing their emotions, not doing anything to the system, right? That's what the controller's goal is there. So, the next one that I want to talk about is something that I've named self-nagging. Now, there could probably be a lot of names for this. It is absolutely a controller thing to self-nag, which means, I don't know if you've had the experience of spinning or ruminating or obsessing in your mind about a conversation and being like, oh, this could have gone better, and I could have said this, or I could have said that, and it's just on and on and on and on. This is the controller trying to figure out how to get past the shame, how to kind of avoid the karma kid's reaction to something by trying to figure out how to be better, how to do it, again, coming back to this idea of perfectly, how to do it more perfectly, right? How to get that just perfect response to everything, always doing the best thing, always spending your time on the best thing. And that can turn into a lot of unrest and upheaval in the mind, where no matter what we're doing, we're always thinking about what's the next thing we need to do. There's no rest. If we sit down, there'll be this message in the mind saying, I need to get up. There's so many more things I need to do, right? There's so many more things I need to accomplish. I need to do it perfectly. I need to catch everything that's going to go wrong. And a lot of times that is driven by this shameful feeling that the karma kid is holding for us. It's like, if I don't stay on top of everything, then my shame might show, right? which ultimately is one of the controller's worst nightmares. So self-nagging can be big as well. The next one I want to talk about is a refusal to be vulnerable or authentic. Okay? If we think that something is inherently wrong with us, which by the way is what shame is saying. Shame is saying something is inherently wrong with us. So the controller isn't saying that's not true, because it would actually be somewhat helpful if they did say that. They're saying we have to hide that, right? We have to hide the thing that is inherently wrong with us. So our authentic self, our most sort of vulnerable, raw being is inherently wrong, okay? That's the message of shame. Now, that isn't what we usually hear on a conscious level. On a conscious level, we're going to feel things like embarrassment or guilt. Oh, I should have done this. I should have done this. I should have been there for that person. I should have handled this differently. Like, that's what we're hearing. But in its most basic and foundational form, shame is saying something is quite literally wrong with you as a person, right? You were born inherently wrong or bad. And this happens because we experience trauma and then we blame ourselves for it, right? So this is coming from that place. It's saying, I am somehow not as good of a human as other humans. Okay, again, all a lie, right? Like I said at the beginning, shame is a lie. Shame is always a lie, okay? That doesn't mean that sometimes guilt isn't a little helpful. If it's, if it helps drive us in a different direction, if it helps us make better decisions, if we treat people better, okay, maybe that's true. But I will say oftentimes guilt gets used against us in a very people-pleasing kind of way, and it is actually generally not helpful. But every once in a while, maybe it is. But for the most part, shame adds no value to our life whatsoever. It just does not help. As a matter of fact, people who tend to treat people the worst actually are riddled with shame. That's one of the reasons they do it. They treat everybody so poorly because they're trying to deal with their own shame by controlling everybody and everything around them, right? That is kind of at the basis of how we respond to shame. Again, controller actions. And that actually brings up what I would call a sixth one here, which is control, right? Now, perfectionism is also a form of control, but just control in general is absolutely a response to shame. So, back to this idea of refusing to be vulnerable or authentic. If we believe something is inherently wrong with us, we're definitely not going to show our most authentic selves to anyone, let alone the world. That is going to be hidden. And that is our attempt to block our shame and not let it show up, not let it show up for anyone, because our most authentic self is not right. It's not good. It's not okay, right? That's the message that we're getting, and that's why we have a tendency to block. Sometimes even blocking some of our most important gifts, for example, things that we are really supposed to bring to the world, because we feel that if we are inherently bad and wrong, our gifts are inherently bad and wrong. Our emotions are inherently bad and wrong. So everything about us is wrong. So we need to put that mask over ourselves and act different, act like a different person. And this is probably one of the biggest battles that we have in our system in general, in our attempts to hide who we really are, right? So the last one I want to talk about today is actually generally not the controller. It's the karma kid. And you might be thinking, well, wait, how does the karma kid defend itself? And it's a good question to ask if you were thinking that question, because the karma kid is the one that holds the shame. but they also hold another emotion, and it usually is layered on top of it. So the karma kid has 3 layers of emotions, and our job in our healing is to work through those different layers. None of these emotions are great or fun, I'm not going to lie, but as we work through them, we release them, which is ultimately what we want to do. So top layer, futility. Okay, that's going to be step 1. Next layer, shame. Next layer, fear. Now, I am not suggesting that we won't experience some fear in between those layers of futility and shame. Is anything ever quite as simple as what I've just described? No, of course not. But I like to put some structure on it because it makes things make sense, at least a little bit, because nothing about this journey makes a ton of sense. But oftentimes, one of the things we can look for to know that our shame is probably a bit active is that futility. Now, again, futility or hopelessness is also hard to spot. It's very much like the shame. Physically, it can be a little hard to see, mostly because the controller is blocking it too. The controller will dissociate us away from all the karma kid's emotions. Futility has a very passive presence. I mean, it basically is passive in nature. So it isn't always easily spotted, especially because with more passive emotions, the controller can successfully dissociate us from them. It's a little harder with anger. When anger is coming up, the controller's attempts at dissociation will often show up as anxiety, and it will be more obvious. Futility is harder. We have to really work to spot it. We have to, but again, we can also use our thoughts if we're feeling like things are really hopeless. Things are not going to work out for us. If we are feeling that depressive energy where we're just not able to get very much done, that is a big sign that futility is near. And futility is fueled by that next layer of shame. So typically, if we are thinking, why bother? The shame right underneath it finishes that sentence. And what I mean by that is, why bother? Because I'm inherently not good enough, right? So that is the rest of the sentence. Why bother is really fueled by the very shame that they are kind of blocking. Futility is a defensive emotion. Depression is a defensive state of being. So when we feel futile, and a lot of times it will show up when we're about to do something really cool, like we're about to take a new step in our lives. We're going to, jump over a particular hurdle, battle something. That's oftentimes when futility shows up. It can be very self-sabotaging. But in reality, that futility and the shame that's fueling it need to be expressed from and released. And as they are, that really cool thing can open up for us. But there usually is a delay, and that delay is the karma kid sharing the emotions that do not match the energy of that really cool thing, and us expressing those emotions so we can move that energy out. And as we do that, then we can go do the really cool thing, right? It's a delay. I'll just call it a delay. It's a very frustrating delay. But there's a bit of paralysis behind that, quite normally. And honestly, it can feel really crappy. And your controller will probably throw a substantial tantrum. Not always, because sometimes they may agree with the karma kid, like something feels too risky to a controller. But for the most part, when there's paralysis, the controller is not happy, generally speaking. So these are the 5, actually 6, if we include the concept of control, areas where we can look for our shame. If we are engaging in these different types of behaviors, we likely have shame under the surface that is being activated in some way by something. So work with these concepts to help build your awareness. And when you do hear from your shame, let it write. Let it write in first person. It is not going to sound good. It's going to say things like, I'm a bad person. I'm inherently bad. I'm wrong. I'm not like everybody else. My story makes me to, whatever the answer to that two question is, right? We want to write from that stuff so we can move it out. As we do, we will notice that some of these controller behaviors will start to settle. We'll start to become a little bit more grounded, a little less dissociated. And then generally we can get to deeper layers of the shame so we can continue to move it out. So thank you all so much for being here with me today. I hope you got something from this session today. I will say your controllers will probably come up and dissociate you from a lot of this information because, as I said, one of the controller's primary goals is to hide shame. So they're not going to like this conversation. Not that they really like any of my conversations, but that's okay. So let yourself write from your shame. Let yourself notice how your shame shows up in your controllers and karma kids behaviors. And I will plan to talk to you guys next week. Hopefully you are checking out my daily posts. I am trying something new. I'm trying to do a little post every day about a topic. At least during December. My goal, of course, would be to set that up as a habit and do it every day from here going forward. But please take a look every day at my page, at my Facebook page. If you're not seeing my posts, I think there is a way to prioritize my page in the settings of Facebook so that you do. So please do keep checking out what I am writing, and hopefully that will help you, especially getting through this season, right? Because it's not exactly super easy. So thank you, Jan, so much for your comment. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Same time, same place. Thank you, guys. Bye.